So Chris Anderson, the ACLU, I mean, you just said before we went to break, basically, the Senate should view the Brennan nomination skeptically, or they should apply the same principles they applied during the Bush administration, which is that when people are sent to the Senate who were embedded at relatively high levels in the CIA during the torture regime, that is a kind of black mark on their record. And I just want to give the argument in opposition to that for a moment, right? Which is what Eli's saying, right? They were told it was clear by the OLC. The OLC said this was legal. It came down from the White House. They are, in the authority structure. They are a product of the executive branch, which was telling them what they were doing was legal. And then also, I think in Brennan's defense, there's the fact that he came out and called waterboarding, which is the most extreme of the methods that were put on the table. He called it torture unambiguously in 2007. Take a look.
So was Secretary Rice correct today when she called it a vital tool?
I'm sorry. He says, I think it is certainly subjecting an individual to severe pain and suffering, which is the classic definition of torture. And I believe, quite frankly, it's inconsistent with American values and is something that should be prohibited. Is that exculpatory in your view?
Well, he's not some CIA agent who's at the line level. He was not out in the field. He was the deputy executive director at all the key points. He was chief of staff to Porter Goss during a lot of these key points. He wasn't some fly on the wall. He also wasn't someone who was at the bottom of the chain. And one of the things I think is really interesting to look at is when he withdrew his candidacy for this position 4 years ago, he wrote to then Senator, and I guess he was president-elect at that point, Obama, withdrawing his name. And at that time, he said that he had no role in the decision-making process for torture. But what we do know is that he knew everything about it. So one of the things that I think the Senate is going to have to figure out is was he kind of a fly on the wall? Was he just CC'd on every memo, or at one side of the spectrum, at the other side of the spectrum is being, I guess, the decider. He's saying he wasn't the decider, but there's a lot of space in between. And in D.C., a chief of staff or a deputy director, what they are usually are implementers. They're not deciders. They're not flies on the wall. They're implementers. And for someone at that level, if he was implementing this torture program, the secret prison program, extraordinary rendition program, that's a big deal.
Well, I mean, you know what? I think this discussion is complicated by the fact that everyone is implicated in this, right? Congress is implicated. They have in successive Congresses, they have essentially had a hands-off approach to these ideas of torture. We don't know how much at the senior levels Congress even knew about what was going on. But if the things that the Bush administration did that were odious to just about every American.
Well, not to just about every American. I mean, that's not true.
Well, that's not true. That's a good point. Right. They were done by the Bush administration, and they were all given a free pass. And somebody like this, I think, is not the implementer, is not the person that you need to look at. You need to look at the Bush administration, all of whom got off scot-free.
And I think we have to look beyond the Bush administration. We have to go from the continuum of the Bush administration to the Obama administration, because John Brennan doesn't just come out of the Bush administration. Right. He's also been there for 4 years of President Obama. And they're involved with the drone program. I just came from Doha, Qatar, where I was covering the climate change summit. But during that time, I went over to Al Jazeera, and I interviewed the only journalist who was held at Guantanamo for 6 years. His name is Sami al-Hajj. Never charged, released after 6 years, held in Afghanistan, then in Guantanamo. He was tortured. He was constantly interrogated about what? Who were the bosses at Al Jazeera? It was an astounding story of how this man was held, only freed after a 400-day hunger fast. The reason I raised Sami al-Hajj is when people watch the Senate confirmation hearings of John Brennan, he is an example, one of the few voices of the voiceless who can describe the reality of what is happening on the ground at Guantanamo. This is not just about John Brennan. It goes to President Obama as well, who promised to close it. It's now the 4th anniversary of President Obama promising to close it.
And Congress blocked that. We need to remember Congress is also implicated in that. I mean, it was one of the first executive orders the president signed, and Democrats wouldn't vote for it.
You're absolutely right. Everyone is implicated here. But John Brennan, the inner circle of President Obama, and that goes to the issue of the drone wars as well.
But can I just push back for a second, though, and just defend Congress and the Senate maybe for a moment? Back during the Bush administration, there were people who were put up for these positions. And one of John Brennan's colleagues John Rizzo, who was at that time acting general counsel of the CIA. That's a Senate-confirmed position to become the general counsel of the CIA. He had such a rough hearing and such a rough confirmation process that he was forced to withdraw his name from consideration for that position. There were other people too. The candidate to be Deputy Attorney General of the Justice Department, Tim Flanagan, also withdrew his nomination. There were a number of other people, including some top military leaders, whose careers basically ended because of this. Now, it's not the same as going to prison. It's not the same as being charged with a crime for a role in torture. But it's a big deal in D.C. and the Senate
Well, you can say that John Brennan had to spend 4 years in the penalty box, right? That he didn't.
That's not hardly the penalty box,
right? It's the penalty box being the White House in the
leader of the intelligence community. And if I may say so, I think that the rest of this panel is engaged in a bit of moral posturing here, because I think that the policy of supporting allied counterterrorism and security services, which I think do far more shocking of the conscience interrogations than everything we know about the EIT program for the CIA, and that went on under Clinton.
When you say EIT, you should say torture. You're talking about enhanced interrogation technique, but we should be clear.
And John Brennan acknowledged that waterboarding was torture, and I think
I want to push back against that. I mean, I first of all agree that waterboarding does shock the conscience, and America shouldn't do it. But there is a debate about what necessarily constitutes torture, and to just assert that without accounting for the fact that there is a disagreement on it, I disagree with you.
Well, you can call it whatever you want. I call it torture.
You can call it torture, and I'm not defending it, but what I'm trying to say is that there's something deeper going on, which is that the U.S. liaison relationship before and after Bush with the Pakistani services, the Egyptian services under Mubarak, and other countries is probably, from a moral perspective, worse than anything that was done under the secret programs with the CIA.
And what you're talking about here is the practice of rendition, right? Which is
more
the
than
idea.
rendition.
Right.
It's more than rendition, because rendition is when you capture someone in country A and you bring them to country B. It is the joint operations that exist in total secrecy with these other services, where they pick something up and they use U.S. intelligence or they use U.S. or something like that, and then the U.S. sort of steps away and it becomes a local issue.
Go do your thing,
ISI.
do your thing.
And then we train the same people and we do everything like that.
I want to get your thought on that in a second. Let's take a quick break.